All right, well, good evening, everyone. I hope that you are having a blast at AbSciCon this week. Thank you all for joining us on this Wednesday evening. My name is Tahira Allen, and I will be one of your moderators tonight, along with my fantastic colleague, Heather Graham, right here. And I'm a science communicator working as the new digital lead for NASA's Astrobiology program and Planetary Science Division. So tonight we have an amazing panel on when worlds collide, science and the arts, where we will be discussing how art can drive our science and how science can drive the arts. We will also be talking about how science can make its way onto a picture, a play, or even a stage. So before we dive into panel introductions, though, I would kind of like to get a temperature of the room. So by a show of hands, who here has a artistic outlet? Okay, very nice, very nice. So how many of you have ever used art to convey scientific topics? Oh, wow. Okay. Many people. That is, okay, great. So who here got into the field of science or maybe got inspiration from science fiction? Okay, very nice. Y'all came to the right show. And then finally, who here is anybody interested in using art to convey science topics, but just doesn't know where to start? Okay, great. So there can sometimes be a notion that science and art don't go together. So one of our big goals tonight is to really draw a bridge between these two areas and to show that they can have a positive influence on each other. So what you can expect tonight, Heather and I will kind of kick off the conversation with a few questions. Then we will open up the floor for any questions from our audience. And then we will end the night with a musical performance by Tim Griffin here on the very end. So does that sound good? Woo! Okay, great. So let's get started with the panel introductions. Heather, do you want to kick us off?
Hi, I'm Heather Graham. I'm a research scientist at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, and when I'm not doing that, I am a theater artist. I started out, before I was even a scientist, doing wigs and prosthetics and accessories for the stage. It turns out that doesn't pay as well as you might think. And I've also written a couple of plays. One of them, very notably, I was working on in 2014 and got to talking with another writer who was working on a similar topic. That person was Margot Lee Shetterly. And we talked about the topics that we were working on. And I went on to write an opera about a NASA mathematician, and she wrote a book on the same topic, which is Hidden Figures. She obviously did a lot better than I did with the topic. But it was such an honor to write that material and get to work with so many excellent theater artists on that. And I'll pass this off to Aaron Gronstal, who represents Paige.
Hi, I'm Aaron Gronstal. I'm at the Astrobiology program office, and I've kind of lived a life in art and science. I was my mother's a visual artist, so I always grew up with the visual arts and drawing comic books a lot and painting and that sort of thing. Actually, my first degree in theater and performance studies. My first actual paycheck was as an actor in Australia, and I wrote a piece that was a theater piece about basically translating my anatomy notes into. I needed to memorize for an exam, so I wrote a play that went through all of my notes, and that got picked up by the International Writers Festival. But yeah, it was cheating. But then I came back and went back into science and ended up at the astrobiology program office, but have always continued my art and I've always found it as an outlet. And when the 50th anniversary of astrobiology came up, Mary Wojtek and Linda Billings, who are also both at the astrobiology program office, really wanted to kind of produce something that we could hand out at the 50th anniversary. And Mary knew that I drew a lot of comic books and that sort of thing in my spare time, and so decided to make use of that. And we produced one just kind of as a handout at that one thing, but teachers got a hold of it and really loved it in the classroom, and we had a lot of requests to keep going. So we've kind of kept the series going and release them at AbSciCon as it comes around, and need ideas for the next one. So if those of you in the back, if you move forward, there's free copies just sitting on some of the tables up here if you want to take some. So if you want to move up closer, and I also have more afterwards. So thank you. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Julie Galle Bagginstas, and I'm a flamenco dancer. And I have become interested in using flamenco dance movement in general, but since I love flamenco, this art form in the schools, I use it in the schools as a teaching artist to teach lessons about things that don't really have anything to do with dance, such as math and as well social studies. I am based in Atlanta. But I work throughout the country. I am performing and teaching and also producing work for my colleagues in the art form who are based here in the US and also visiting from Spain. So I'm really feeling like I'm in great company here with some fantastic artists and scientists. And so thank you for letting me join the panel.
Thank you. This mic doesn't seem to be working. I'm Larry Niven. I've been writing published science fiction for 58 years. And for that long, I've been doing astrobiology without actually naming it. Do you need to know more than that about me? I live a dull life. Free of disasters mostly, and my writing has slowed way down lately.
Howdy, I'm Tim Griffin. I am a STEM educator from Los Angeles, and I'm also a musician. And I brought those two together by starting to write songs about 30 years ago for my students to help them learn about science and math and other subjects, and eventually writing songs with them. And the music for education grew into a second full-time job. So I now run a small nonprofit called Griffin Education, where I lead a team of educators and musicians and scientists too. And we make and give away songs that help kids learn about physics and biology and grammar and all kinds of fun stuff. So I'm super excited to be here because I've already met a bunch of potential collaborators, and they don't know it, but I'm going to be stalking them online until I get them to help me write some new songs about stuff that I don't know enough about to tell the stories myself.
Okay, great. Thank you all so much. So, Aaron, I am going to pick on you since you mentioned these fantastic graphic novels. So, what made you decide to use your superpowers to, go into science and science communication and, in a way, education?
Let's see. I actually, when I started at NASA, it was I was an undergrad, and I was studying molecular environmental biology, did a dual degree in theater, and I did a think tank with NASA, met Chris McKay, and that summer I was going to stay around in Berkeley and randomly emailed a person on the website saying, hey, I'm studying molecular biology, but I'm also studying theater and writing, and is there anything I can do this summer? And they emailed me back and they're like, sure, come down and do some writing for us. They needed somebody to do that had a knowledge of science to do some writing. And yeah, they just gave me a desk in a room with Marco back there. And yeah, I just kind of never left, but continued school while I was doing that which was the Astrobiology Integration Office at the time, before it was a program at NASA headquarters. And then kept on with science, stayed with science at NASA, and then came back around to the art when Mary kind of approached me about doing the comics, and Linda Billings played a big role in that, who's the editor on that, and who has done a lot of kind of academic study of comic art and that sort of thing. So we kind of developed that together. So.
The secret history of Aaron, who I've known for ages, and I just keep learning. Julie, I wanted to ask you a question. So I'm curious about how you see the relationship between your craft, dance, your art, and science and the disciplines that you've worked with, especially mathematics. What are the connections there? I can imagine there might be at least one.
So there are the obvious, what I kind of call the obvious connections between dance and music, because we're moving to rhythm there, and math, and that's in fractions. And so that's the easy one to go into a classroom and talk to students about. By the way, I work a lot with K through 12 students. I also work at the university level, but the majority of my work as a teaching artist is with K through 12 in K through 12 classrooms. So that's the environment that I'm thinking of. So that's the one that jumps out there. Fractions. There are some other connections in terms of moving bodies to think about, including geometry, and to help kids start to understand the shapes in terms of relating movement to shapes, and then to ask them what do they see there, to get them thinking on their terms instead of, say, the teacher's terms. There are some other connections that I've learned to use, including just some basic math skills of counting and addition and subtraction at the very basic level for younger students. And then as we get farther ahead with older audiences or older classrooms, I like to try to challenge the students to think a little bit more abstractly. And this is where my interest in the ellipse comes in with the two foci, and its connection to flamenco for me came about because I see our rhythms. We use what we call contratiempos. So there's the bass beat, and then there's the counter to that, the eighth note for the musicians in the room. The standard of excellence now is to work in the contratiempo rather than working on the beat. And so in the ellipse, in the work that I did, the study that took place in the classes with Elena del Rio Para, who is here at Georgia State University in world languages, she introduced me to this idea that these two foci in visual art, one will stand out and one will recede. And this is actually a theory by Severus Ardui, who's a Cuban poet. So you've got something standing out and something receding. And so for me, this is our contratiempo in flamenco. And that we're trying to constantly emphasize the part of the beat that doesn't really exist, the anti-rhythm, in my opinion. And then we're not just trying to emphasize it, but then subdivide it. And so to get the students to think abstractly in terms of something that might appear to stand out and something that might recede is another way to get them to start to think about this ellipse, and then so many other things, use that as a metaphor for so many other things in life, in all the places that we find imbalance. And so this is where a connection comes in, a few connections come in between mathematics and the work that I do, staying in the lane of math, and then also getting outside of there for some abstract thought and creativity.
Yeah, wow. Thank you so much, Julie. So now we see that through dance. And so Tim, I'm wondering now with your craft, how you see a connection between art and science and conveying these topics through what you do.
Yeah, there are all kinds of ways that one can help you to bridge the gaps for the other. Thinking about flamenco dancing, for one example, is a great way to teach fundamental concepts like temperature. Because flamenco, you're mostly stationary, and yet you're constantly moving nonstop. And as the music gets faster, that's temperature, right? That's what heat really is. There's an atom, and it may be more or less in the same place, but it's moving faster and faster. And then other kinds of dancing, you think about square dancing or quadrilles or Regency dancing, where people are moving around and they're never quite touching, but there's a very defined structure in terms of their physical relationships to each other. I can think of no better way to teach how molecules are assembled. You think about, Larry, you've been to Regency dancing with me. You introduced me to it. and you get a long line of couples facing each other and moving around, and then, slowly peeling off and then reassembling the formation up at the top. That's DNA. So, the arts are such a great way to teach the things that we can't really see with our eyes.
Yeah, I like that too.
It's okay. So, Larry, I want to ask you a question, which is Larry and I had a chance to talk about this, and he knows that I am a big fan of his books, and I was a huge fan of Mote in God's Eye and Ringworld, and your books really helped me think about, imagining these other places. And now I'm an astrobiologist, and I get to study those kinds of imaginary worlds that might have life for a day job. And I wanted to know, Larry, did you ever work with scientists as part of your creative process? Were you looking into the scientific literature? Was that part of how you worked on world building? Did you work with scientists on doing that too in your creative process?
It's a yes, but not very much. Do you know the name Robert Forward? Dr. Robert Forward was was with Hughes Research designing a gravity detector when Jerry Pournelle wrote a story called "He Fell into a Dark Hole." Beat him into print. Forward called to Jerry. Jerry called me. We visited Robert, and I learned about quantum black holes. They were called then. Now mini black holes. Jerry and I and some others, persuaded Robert Forward to write science fiction. So there's certainly a connection in there. Also, I sent Robert Forward these specs, the outline for the integral trees back when it was called the stage trees or something. I had to change it because Robert looked my specs over, told me I was not crazy, and told me what the tides around a neutron star would do to the winds around a flock of trees in a gas torus held by neutron star tides. Yeah, that was a delightful, wonderful, ongoing experience.
That is. And so, Larry, actually, I've got a follow-up. Could you share a little bit about what your creative process looks like? Could you share a little bit about what your creative process looks like for writing a novel?
I wait for inspiration. I listed myself as a dilettante. I'm not one of the really good writers who can write when they don't feel like writing. I've gotten along with this handicap for 58 years, and nobody ever calls me on it. I use a computer. I've used a computer ever since the middle of the integral trees. The Ringworld engineers. Jerry Pournelle made me get a computer back when that was a whole new idea, writing with a computer. He put his together to fit the needs of a writer with the help of a guy named Tony Peach, a computer man. And when he had his perfect, he made me buy one. And I bought two because my wife is a computer honcho, and she needed one to play with. And it got me spare parts, which you needed in those days.
Thank you so much. And so, Heather and Aaron, when you're thinking about your science and needing to convey it through artistic means, does it force you to think about your science in a different way?
Want to go first? Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting question because I think the easy answer would be like, oh yeah, if I want to convey my science through artistic things, I have to dumb it down or make it easier. And actually, that's not true at all because you have to figure out how to encapsulate so much of your knowledge into much more simple, not simple. You have to compact it. You have to think about how you are going to take all of that body of knowledge that's inherent to you. That's almost instinctual because you've been, marinating in these scientific topics for a decade, and figure out how to get that into a compact way that it's convenient for a novice who doesn't have those decades to understand. And that's actually hugely challenging. It's probably more challenging to try to figure out how to do that compacting process than to, leisurely draw out over many pages of, materials and methods of your usual scientific publication, when you're trying to do that. So actually, I think it's a lot more challenging. And I think the other thing it really does is it makes you think about what is the core message here that I'm trying to get across? And that's something that's much more important in an artistic thing, where you want your audience, you want the people who are taking the time out of their day to listen to you or view your piece, you want to have an idea of what they're going to leave with. What is the important element they leave with? And, when you're writing a scientific paper, that can be many things, and you have, pages to put that out there. But, in art, you really have to distill it down, and that's actually a really tough process. So it's actually harder. It's not just, cutting off the hard parts and simplifying.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. The distillation can be really difficult. And like with the comic art, what I love about it is that you're kind of working in two languages at the same time. We think of comics as being sort of a modern way of storytelling, but it's really not. I mean, comics are a form of visual storytelling, and visual storytelling is a language that has been with us for so long. And I think, yeah, I mean, I think it was at least in 2018, the oldest one was the oldest cave paintings were found in Indonesia, and they're 44,000 years old, and it depicts a hunting story, and we can still read them, like we today can still read them, and I think that visual storytelling is something that's ingrained in all of us. And so the comic art is this beautiful way of speaking to a reader in two languages at the same time, one that's visual, one that is words, and there are people that connect with each of those in different ways and better. Some people are very visual learners, so it's so fun to take a concept and be, okay, I can talk about it here, but then I'm going to talk about it in this way in a completely different language. And you don't want them to say the same thing. Like one of the golden kind of rules of comics is, you don't want to draw a picture of Batman punching the Joker and then say, and then Batman punched the Joker in the text. Like you shouldn't have to do that. If you have to do that, then you failed in the artwork. Like the artwork should show that, And so you can kind of, in that one panel, convey a lot of information between the words and the images in unique ways. And that's one of the really fun parts about comics. And it was really interesting when we started the series, which contains real scientists and their real work, and it has academic references in the back. And the scientists that are in it, we send a copy in advance so they can see their likeness and approve it and approve what they're saying. And we first started, I'd kind of put together the script and do the draft drawings and stuff and send it to the scientists. And there were a couple that you'd get back and they're like, oh, no, I have to say this. And they send you 3 pages of text. And it's like, no, that's not how comics work. I can't put, I'll give you 1 extra sentence. And so it's been this back and forth of distilling that real core information out of it. And it's been fun. As the series has gone along, I think our community and the people that have kind of familiarized themselves with the books, it's gotten easier. Like the scientists are getting, it's like it's helping some of those. And I've had some scientists come up to me and say, like, that would actually really help me kind of narrow this down and figure out how I would tell this to a classroom of 5-year-olds or that kind of thing. So it's been a really fun process.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And so, Tim, do you have any tips for some of our audience members who are interested in, conveying their science through art, but might not really know where to start?
Yeah, I'd say the first thing is it's never going to be as good as you pictured it in your head or heard it in your head or whatever, and that's okay. I've been performing for fun and for money since the 1980s, and I've never had a perfect show. I've never written a perfect song. So that's the first thing you got to remember. Second is you got to figure out what is the one thing you want people to take away. If you're lucky, they'll remember one really good job. It'll be the right thing, the thing you wanted them to remember. Most songs it's something frivolous, like wave your hands in the air like you just don't care. And everything in the song, every word, every beat has to lead into supporting that one key idea. Now, if we're writing about science, maybe the idea is all living things are made out of cells. If that's the one big idea, then everything in the song has to lead toward that. And that's one of the nice things to structure your thinking around a key idea. Because if you try to put all the information into one picture or one dance or one novel or one song, then it's going to be a mess.
All right, thank you.
I always put at least one idea into a novel.
Thank you. So I want to pause right here and see if we have any questions from the audience. If anybody wants to come up and ask a question, feel free. We've got this microphone right here. Single file line, maybe. That'll work. And so I will pause.
For me? Both of us. Okay. I think drumming is a fantastic way to teach math because it's all about time. And so measuring things and dividing them up into fractions and reassembling them in new ways that are exciting, using the same parts to create something new, which again is a great feedback into chemistry and molecules, where we take things apart and put them together in new ways. So anything with percussion. As far as choosing styles of music, though, I love to hand that one back to the students. Where if I'm with elementary school kids and they're doing the water cycle, I give them an assignment where I want, for each stage of the water cycle, choose 20 seconds of music from anywhere you can find it, put it together, choreograph it. I want you to show me without words that water molecules are evaporating and then condensing and precipitating and running off or freezing.
I will agree that if we have to make a choice, let the kids make the choice, as long as it's something that that the teaching artist can handle there. For me, though, my preference is flamenco because I can see the many ways to subdivide the beats and then get the kids moving. And in terms of movement, we can have movement we have this in dance, this idea called the elements of dance, and this is a group of labels and definitions that we use to talk about movement objectively, and it might be something as simple as zigzag or straight, sharp or smooth. And so we can use these words to describe our movements, and then in addition to that, use the beats to create movement that has high energy or low energy. And so if we have a movement that is low energy and takes many beats of music, then we could potentially take the same movement and change the energy and make it a faster movement, so to speak, that takes fewer beats. And so then we start to see how movement can take a long time or a little bit of time, and we can embody this idea of counting and math. And so add in there for flamenco a little bit of percussive hand clapping and stomping, and it really builds the excitement for the students, I believe. But yeah, I mean, this is how I see how movement can be used to explain math one way, and then yeah, and then as if you like a certain kind of music, let's use that, and let's talk about that first. Yeah.
Thank you all. I'm Fouad El-Badr from Harvard University. I have a little question and one request. So the question is, through the Enlightenment period, 17th century, 18, up to the 19th century, we have this non-dissociation between art and science. So you take a naturalist from the 19th century or a physicist or everybody have some knowledge and some understanding and connection between art and science. They didn't make the difference. So from your own perspective as artists, writer, musicians, how do you see that today? I know that since the 19th century, we tend to specialize and dissociate the fields and become more and more, between brackets, robotic and technical, and virtuoso, let's say, in our own field. But do you see that this tendency will come back of this Enlightenment kind of period that went up to the 19 or not? And the later request, first for the great dancer here. I am an aficionado, and I can get the duende sometimes, but I'm not an artist. So it reminds me the geometry thing of something unrelated to flamenco, but from Ornette Coleman, when he used the free jazz as a way to build geometrical music, and maybe it could be also a way to talk about geometry in music. And my request is that you have a stage that can resonate, and I hope you have good shoes, and if we can put a little bit of buleria, maybe you can show us few steps. That would be great to hear you. I would love to. Thanks.
I'll take it if nobody else will.
May I?
I don't know.
Yeah.
The tradition says that the arts were joining the arts and the sciences was attempted by a man who published a magazine called Amazing. His name was Hugo Gernsback, and it was in the, when was that? 60s, before my birth. Sorry, 30s, 20s.
1920?
26.
Okay, 20s. The stories weren't always perfect. They weren't always good, but it was a start.
Well, I'll give one argument in favor of integrating them. I think is that creativity is a muscle. If you do creative work, it's going to spread into everything you do. I think if you don't have creativity, you may be really good with your, you may get straight A's all the way through college and grad school. You may be a good lab worker. You may even be the director of the lab. But I think the people who make the breakthroughs are the ones who exercise their creativity, and and when they're out walking or feeding the dog or standing in the shower, they're thinking about, okay, what else? There was a teacher I listened to today from New Zealand in a lecture upstairs. She was talking about how in New Zealand, the teachers are trained to think in terms of every lesson needs to have a what, a so what, and what next. And I think the arts are the bridge between what and what next. The arts are what give us the so what.
I guess the 2 cents I would add is, I mean, I don't think I could ever separate the two myself personally. That's why I did a theater degree and a biology degree, and like luckily that panned out all right. but yeah, I think the reasons I was interested in art are kind of the same reasons I was interested in science. It's the question of, what is this? Why are we here? What are we, what are we doing? Those sort of questions, and two different angles to find answers.
And I just want to add in that with thinking about creativity and how to find answers or solve problems, that the creativity is it's a process, and when focusing on the process, we get to the breakthroughs, as you mentioned there, and in terms of putting the arts and science and back together, to look at an artistic practice with the same lens that you look at the scientific method, to put those two back on the same track will help to bring these back together. I think it can happen.
I'm an author and I write genre fiction. And my primary motivation in writing is to entertain. Like that's the first thing that I want. I want people to enjoy the writing. And listening to you all discuss how you are trying to educate primarily, first and foremost, is really interesting to me, but it sounds to me very restrictive, very constrictive. And I wondered if it feels that way to you, if you're like, no, I really want to just go off and do, like, maybe take this core of an idea, but then write a completely separate story that it isn't about this thing, or if having this core idea of education is, if you don't feel it's constrictive, if you feel it's somehow freeing. I'm interested.
Yeah, I was gonna take a stab at that while everyone else mulls. I think that's an interesting idea, and I will say that my plays are 100% not educational, but there's always a message, and so I think this is an interesting thing for us to consider. Like, what is that fundamental difference? What makes a message somehow suddenly informational or educational? Just learning about a world that someone else lived in can be either a message or educational. And I think that's a really interesting idea that you're talking about. And I think it just has to do with, like, what was the thing you wanted someone to take away? Do you want them to be able to repeat some sort of process or understanding something about the world, or just be able to imagine the world from someone else's point of view?
And I would also say, like, there is that balance between education and communication, and I think a lot of art is about communicating. And sometimes, maybe if you're doing it in a traditional, like for traditional education, like in the classroom and that sort of thing, it's more about knowing your audience and knowing how to communicate with them. And you could look at that as a constraint, but also that's, like, sometimes constraints push you into finding really cool solutions, and push your creativity and allow you to kind of create even more. So I don't see it as a constraint personally. And there is art that you create for yourself, and sometimes it's just good to scream into the void and not care who's going to hear it. But sometimes when you have a message you want to communicate, it actually kind of boosts your creativity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks very much for convening the panel. My name is Dan Lappin with Intergenesis Designs. And uh-oh. Am I still on? Yeah. So the first thing I'd like to ask is how could we could get 3 men who are both all flamenco dancers in a science conference? What's going on with this, huh? Harvard and University of Chicago. Yeah, and so I think that's really curious, but I think part of it is the point of the physicality of some arts brings a quality of the biology of life force. And I think in an astrobiology conference, that's really, really important as we look at cellular structures that have energy systems themselves. Okay, we're looking at primary life force, and I don't know how long we've been trying for scientists to put life in a box. Okay, but I think the arts and the humanities for millennium have been, how do we, all the way back to the gymnasiums of Greece, how do we embody with the fullness of our soma, okay, versus a trend in cognition, okay, and the central nervous system itself. I think it's a really important point of how we look at the anatomy and physiology of our arts and our sciences with that. And so my question both to the panel and also to the audience here is, are people so what are people doing within their labs to bring artistic metaphors or artistic examples into daily practices? To how to make it physical so that we integrate between our right and left hemisphere, between our head and our bodies, to bring forth that fundamental internal inquiry process. So I'm curious for the panel to comment, but if anyone else has some ideas about that, I'm actively working in that area and be curious to discuss it more.
I don't move.
I have a friend who practices her flamenco pasos in the lab while she does her slides.
I think we've learned that next AbSciCon we need to have a flamenco performance.
Yes,
who knew?
Yeah.
Yeah, anybody in the audience have any ideas, feedback?
Abigail Johnson, Georgia Tech. You could put musical notes along with your data.
Okay.
How many people? I was gonna ask, how many people listen? If you work in a lab, have listen to music while you're working. I mean, I always, yeah, and maybe I'm not quite consciously doing it, but yeah, for sure. I remember working in an anaerobic chamber and having my hands in the gloves for 8 hours at a time, and you have to, your back would give out if you weren't moving around a bit and stuff. But I don't think I ever kind of consciously thought about those kinds of the connections that you were talking about.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be thinking about that all night now.
Got something to add?
Just a little maybe comment. I grew up in a kind of arts environments. Many ideas, if you go just back to even the late 40s, 50s, there were artists that discussing concepts. And those concepts, if you take, for example, just cubism by itself, and the conversation that you would have between Picasso or Modigliani, etc., these are really concepts that deals with geometry, that's about perception, with so many different aspects that the scientists will take over, and they can have a real conversation with physicists and with mathematicians, and it did happen in the past, and it still happen. And I think there is, when I ask the question and it's related to yours, there is this connection. It's just the tendency in your daily life job, you have to be have a kind of a speciality. But in overall, the arts is a principal component of science, and it should be like that, and we should teach more arts within science for science trainings and classes. That's what I think.
I'd add to that petition to add musical abstracts alongside graphical abstracts. My name's Annalise Meyer. I'm from MIT Hui. And we've heard a lot among the panelists about kind of how we can use these arts and music to reach across age demographics. I'd be interested to hear more about either examples of what you have done or what you would hope to do to reach across race, gender, and sexuality dynamics, demographics, because I feel like arts probably has a huge opportunity to bring science to a range of those demographics.
I will try to approach that by saying most of the plays that I've written have been performed and staged by America's oldest African-American theater arts group in Baltimore, the Arena Theater. I'm so proud to be able to work with them, and just top quality people. And so I think that, you know, it was really great to be able to as a scientist and artist, work in that community, and I felt so honored. And I don't know if that qualifies as an answer to your question, but you know, I think it's just something that you have to make part of your practice. You know, we can think about grand plans for these things, or we can think about solutions that I, as an artist or scientist, can make part of my own practice to build those bridges myself.
I would argue, to some degree, the arts, one of their strengths is they help us get into the heads of people outside our own experience. And that's, you know, part of the appeal of science fiction, for example, or, you know, we can look through other people's eyes. We can experience their story to some degree, but also as a storyteller and musician, I want to be wary of cultural appropriation. There are certain lines where I want to be careful about crossing them, and the answer there is collaboration. So I make a point of reaching out to people whose life experience is different from my own. And are there ways we can work together, or just invite them to submit their work and include it in the library that I run on my website? Because the main thing I do through my nonprofit is we have a library of teaching songs mainly for kindergarten to 8th grade, but also some high school and college stuff. And we're trying to turn it into more than just the Tim Griffin show. We need people of every kind of experience to share their stories through music if we're going to really be fully inclusive. Because there's some kinds of stories where I can't tell it, and even if I did nail it, which probably wouldn't happen, but even if I did, it still would sound a little weird coming from a guy who was born into every kind of privilege to be singing about the experience of slavery, for example.
Yeah. I'd like to get this said. What we storytellers do is we follow the scientists around. The scientists, the mathematicians, they're the leaders. We look for the interesting things that could generate stories in what they develop.
So go with me here. With the work with the ellipse that I have done, I've looked at these foci, and I've looked at this rhythmic idea of contratiempo, and I've followed it into the African diaspora and kind of fallen into a group of people who research the roots of flamenco in the diaspora. And in Atlanta, and through my research, I found that there is a shared common root, if you will, between flamenco and a lot of the rhythms and dances and musics of the diaspora. And that includes hip hop in Atlanta. And so my work with Mathematics in Motion here in Atlanta included an exploration between hip hop and flamenco to find where we could discover common points and differences, and then use that as a metaphor for a community. And so this is a way in the southern US that we have begun to put flamenco in the seat of activism, if you will, to try to get to some of these ideas about inclusion and changing perspective.
Thank you.
Hi, Tim Livengood, Goddard Space Flight Center and University of Maryland. And I just want to disagree a little bit with Larry's modesty a moment ago about following science, because in my memory, you were one of the first people who was taking seriously the idea of inhabited planets at red dwarf stars, which is now something that's becoming really important to consider in astrobiology, but about 15 years ago was crazy talk, and clearly it would be silly to talk about something like that. I had a paper I did about 10 years ago looking at Earth from the outside as an analog exoplanet, in which I managed to sneak in a professional reference to Frank Herbert for Dune because of Earth's spectrum when you look at it in the visible. And only one of the reviewers caught it, but he said, I will allow it. But I have two that I'm working on now after a long delay that are related to that, one of which I came up with a model for something I was seeing in my data on the moon. And about a year after I concocted this, I was reading a novella by Poul Anderson in one of the Shared World collections, actually the first one of the Man Kazin Wars Shared World collection, saying, God damn it, his scenery setting anticipated me by 25 years. So the only part of the paper I know for sure is going to be in there now is that the authors are happy to cede priority to the earlier work. But the other one is, I'm working on one now on observing the Earth from its poles as a model exoplanet. And I would love to fit in a professional reference to you, referencing the world Jinx. And I just want to know, what would you recommend as the best source from your work to point to for that reference?
Okay, I've had some effect. There's a phrase, flash mob, that generated from my flash crowd. Weirdly, it was a story about teleportation, and there isn't any teleportation, but it still works. Communication has gotten so good that you could generate a mob just by having something interesting happen. Sorry. Sorry.
No worries. No. But you just got an active collaboration out of this conference, Larry.
The remark about collaboration? Collaboration is wonderful. It generates stories and characters that would not emerge from a single mind. And it's a lot friendlier than sitting in a room typing.
All righty, well, we're going to take these last two questions, and then if you'd like to stick around, we will have a wonderful performance here by Tim Griffin, and our panelists will also be around if you have additional questions, collaborations, photos, you name it, we're here. So thank you all for your time, and we'll move forward with these two questions.
Hi, Lydia Kivrak, University of Florida. How do you feel about astrobiology in particular as an avenue for artistic expression? I feel that in particular astrobiology is such a almost inherently artistic subfield because it is such a human question, the search for life beyond Earth, and art is also inherently very human. So I just wanted to hear a little bit of your thoughts on that.
It is amazing how big a crew we can gather to discuss astrobiology, given that the topic has no subject. If we discover alien life, it will change everything. All of the rules we've been laying down will turn out to be imaginary.
I was just going to say that, I think that what's great about astrobiology and science fiction and how I see these things coming together is it really is a way to just imagine another world. And, certainly all of my theater art has been pretty much about this world. And so, getting to think about the possibility space of humanity is certainly a refreshing aspect of astrobiology and art.
Yeah, and I would say astrobiology is incredibly creative. And a lot of the, part of that is there's so many disciplines involved, and there's so many people from different backgrounds and different ways of thinking, and it takes a lot of creativity to work across those kind of disciplinary lines that have been, built up over hundreds of years in our educational system, and to kind of break those boundaries and communicate with each other and share those ideas. It's also, when you're thinking about the big questions about, the potential for life on other planets or the origin of life on Earth, we're studying what we know. We're studying Earth as our only example, and when you're trying to take those mechanisms that we're learning about on Earth and extrapolate that to a world like Mars or other worlds, it requires creativity and it requires imagination. And same thing with the origin of life. We're trying to fill gaps in knowledge that we have no kind of physical evidence to, left up front. Well, I mean, we do, I guess. I mean, we've got the stuff that's evolved from the origin of life, but like working back down that takes a ton of creativity. So.
Yeah. Tail again on what Aaron said about that. The arts are such a great way to approach this multidisciplinary field, because again, the arts are all about taking different pieces of things and putting them together